Hello, everyone. How are you today? Hope you're doing well. My name's Carl. Welcome to this webinar on behalf of the TEFL org. We're live. I'm here in Belfast, Northern Ireland. We're live on Facebook, YouTube, LinkedIn. And today I'm going to be talking for the next sort of 50 minutes or so about the world of TEFL, teaching English as a foreign language. The main topic of today is going to be teaching reading. But this is a live Q&A. So if you do have any questions at all about teaching English as a foreign language, please do put them in the chat. And I will get to those questions either during the presentation if one sort of matches what I'm talking about at the time, or after I've done all the slides. There'll be plenty of time afterwards to answer your questions. As I said, I'm in Northern Ireland, so hello from there. I can see people saying hello already. That's fantastic. I love to know what exotic parts of the world people are in. I can see, although I can see the first hello I can see is in St Albans, Chris, which isn't the most exotic of places. If people don't know, that's just north of London, near I was born near there. GS is in North Carolina, I think that is. Hello, Paul in Toronto. Chevy, the good fella. You might win the name race today, Chevy. Hi, Laura. Hi, Sophia. Hi, the Garden Emporium. That sounds very nice. Hello, Catherine in Cardiff. I love Cardiff. I used to do some EFL teaching in Cardiff. Sonia, hello. Dav is in West Lothian. I can't keep up with everyone. There's Spain, Malta, Cambridge, Nigeria. Wow. Some more people in Ireland. Hello. Chasing Joe Biden, who's running around Ireland at the moment. Peter's in Hollywood, Northern Ireland. That is literally just down the road. Peter, I'm in Bangor. Right. Look, I can't even keep up with all the hellos. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in today. So, as I said, my name's Carl. I work as a teacher trainer here at the TEFL org. What that means is if you are in Northern Ireland or in the Republic of Ireland and you want to become a TEFL teacher with us and you decide to do one of our practical courses, you might get to spend the weekend in a hotel conference room with me, where I can help teach you about how to be a TEFL teacher from my years of experience of teaching in places such as Japan, China, Vietnam, Azerbaijan, Kazakhstan. I taught in Iraq for a bit, Spain and Italy, and now I work online as a teacher. I also work as an examiner in different exam boards in the field of English language teaching. So let's get going about teaching reading. So, right, the first thing is, why teach reading skills? So when you sort of think about, if you're not someone that knows much about TEFL, you might think that, you sort of teach vocabulary and you teach grammar, but actually a big part, and I would say an even more important part myself, although people might disagree with me, is teaching the skills of English, or skills of a language, not necessarily just English. So teaching reading, writing, speaking, and listening. And I think, and I love teaching reading, I think reading is a very important skill. And I think it's quite important because it's one of the best way to learn new words. And I believe that learning vocabulary is just as, or maybe even more important as learning the grammar of a language. You need to learn some grammar, but also vocabulary can get you really, really far and is really, really helpful. And reading, I believe, is the best skill for doing that. So for this reason, if you're teaching sort of reading skills, and in this, I'm going to talk a bit about the different types of skills and talking about the different types of questions and a typical reading lesson. But obviously, what it tends to happen is that a lot of reading skills goes alongside vocabulary work. So if you feel like your students need to learn a few more words, or they want to learn new words, doing a reading lesson is quite a good way of doing that. The other reason for teaching reading is that most English as a foreign language exams involve reading. So that when I'm talking about sort of the ones like IELTS or Cambridge, this kind of thing, they have sort of either a combined exam where they might do reading and writing together, or they have a separate reading exam, a separate speaking exam, a separate listening exam, a separate writing exam. And most students you teach will want to at some point take an EFL exam. They are at some point moving up, even the kids, believe it or not, that are sort of maybe sort of 12, 13 years old, they'll be moving up to take an IELTS test or a Trinity test or a Cambridge test or a TOEIC test at some point. It's the number one reason for learning English, basically, is academia and to pass an exam. It can also be a good way for you to know if students are improving. So if you want to know the ability of your students, giving them a text and seeing how well they answer the questions that you give them is a good way of knowing if they're improving. It's a lot easier to mark as a teacher, especially a newly qualified teacher. It's a lot easier to mark yes or no, correct or incorrect questions for reading or listening. Listening, I'd put in this, than it is to mark someone's speaking or someone's writing. As you get older, speaking and writing becomes easier, but listening and reading is quite easy to mark. If you're sort of giving them a question, you can see whether it's correct or incorrect. Okay. Now, the thing about reading is you've got to try and teach it in a real world type of situation. Don't sort of think that the way that you read in your second language should be different from the way that you read in your first language. And what that kind of means is you have to sort of think of the type of activities that you'll do and match them to sort of real world situations where you would learn, where you would read in your own L1. So think about how you read in your L1. So what are the typical things we read? Things like books, websites, magazines, this kind of thing. But also it can be things like sort of looking for certain information in terms of timetables or in terms of looking at graphs, for example. Lots of different ways we read in L1, and each type of text or each different piece of information that we're trying to get, we use a different technique to read. So just give you an example. If I go on the BBC website or the Guardian website or the New York Times website, and I'm looking for a news story that I like the look of, I don't read every single one. What do? I read the headlines before I click on them. And, you know, just as a current sort of news story that interests me, the president of America is in Ireland. Joe Biden is here. I'd like to know more about this. So I would look for a headline that contains Joe Biden, or I'd look for a headline that contains the word Ireland, and I'd see if I can predict that that is a good headline to click. I click on it. I don't like reading stuff about celebrities, what the latest movie stars doing. So if I see a headline like that, I don't click on it. I predict what I'm going to get just from the headline. That's the sort of skill. Another type of thing that you might look at is looking at the pictures or looking at the headlines on the pictures or the title of a picture before you read it. We do it with books. We do it with magazine articles. When we're just sort of browsing through quickly, we would look at the pictures and we decide before we read. Chapters in an index of a book. We would look at them to find, we would scan something that we would like the look of, and then we'd find that number and then we'd go for it. We'd look for some specific information within a page. If we're looking to get a quick answer to something, I do this on Wikipedia when I'm looking for example, football players, and I want to know how many time or what teams they've played for before. I would scan through it quickly and I'd look for certain words. I'd look for specific information. And the other thing we do in our L1 is we read different types of books. So we look at things like, you know, the way we would read sort of a factual book would be different from the way we would read a fictional book. And what we want to try and do is bring these sort of activities into the classroom. And your goal as a teacher is to try and get students to read naturally. Now, when you give them a book, when you give them a text in the classroom, every student will start on the first word and then they will work a way across. They find a word that they don't know the meaning of. They look in their phone to check the meaning, or if they're a great student, they look in their paper dictionary to try and find the meaning. That's not natural. And what you've got to try and do, and I'll talk about it a bit more, is to get them to read more naturally. And one of the ways that we do this is to look for top-down activities. What is top-down? So top-down means looking at the whole of the text. So you've got a text in front of the student, you've either photocopied it or you've put it up on the screen or you've sent it to them via email, however you're going to get it to them. You want to give them some sort of activity where they don't look at each word individually. You want to give them an activity where they sort of look at the whole text, or they look at the headings within a text. The type of activity you give them will not be word for word, looking word 1, word 2, word 3, word 4, word 5. Okay. And this can involve students' prior knowledge. So that means you could build on something that they've done before in class, or you could build on their knowledge that they have from outside the classroom. One of this thing, it can mean to look at pictures. So you could put the text down. You could say, right, look at the pictures. What sort of text do you think this is? Where do you think you would find this text? Can you predict where this text would be? Can you predict what the content of this text would be? Look at the headings. Okay, how many headings can you see on this? 5 headings, teacher. Right, okay, what are the different headings? What do you think will be in each section? Predict, 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 that kind of thing. You could sort of see, right, okay, here is a text. It comes from a book. Do you think it would be at the start of the book, in the middle of the book, at the end of the book? This is a text from a website. What category on the website? Do you think it would be entertainment? Do you think it would be business? Do you think it would be music, sport, whatever it might be? The students sort of look at the text as a whole, not word for word, trying to predict what it would be. And here are some sort of the activities that you might do in terms of this kind of thing. So one of the key, and there's a couple of different ways of doing top down, but the most common one, and the one that you'll probably read about the most as a learner teacher or as a TEFL teacher going forward, is something called skimming activities. And this is where the students look at the whole of the text to get a general idea of the content, of the opinion, of the tone of the text. Just skimming through it, looking at the pictures, looking at the headings, maybe just sort of looking at every 5th or 6th word or the words that stick out for them, but they're not looking at the whole of the text. So here's some activities that I've done in the classroom. You might put a text down in front of them, and you might say, right, you've got 2 minutes to read this whole text. Teacher, we can't read this in 2 minutes. You've only got 2 minutes to look at it. So don't read it word for word. Look at the headings, look at the pictures, and then choose which of these 3 summaries, and you put 3 different summaries on the board or on the handout that you're giving them, which of these 3 summaries best summarizes the text. So that way, they're not looking for a specific one piece of information. They're looking at the text as a whole to see what matches. Okay, here is a text. You've got 2 minutes to read this text. Where do you think you would find this text? Or you would find it on a website. Okay, good. What type of website? Or you would find it on a business news website. Fantastic. Or you would find this in a textbook, teacher, on a textbook on science, on biology. Fantastic. Great. They're looking at the whole text. Right, here's a headline of a text, or here's the title of a text. What do you think this text will contain? Okay, tell your partner. Okay, I think that this text will contain scientific research. Okay, great. Right, then you show them the rest of the text. You've got 2 minutes to read it. Was your prediction correct? What do you think this text will contain? Then slightly looking more within the text, but still sort of skimming. So you're skimming a mini section of it. You're not necessarily skimming the whole of the text. Match a heading to a paragraph. You could also do match a heading to the whole text. But so you could have 3 or 4 different paragraphs within the text, and you give them 3 or 4 different headings, and they have to match which heading matches which paragraph. So again, they're not really looking at individual words for specific information, things like who, what, or where, not that kind of thing. They're looking at a whole thing, because this is the sort of thing that we do naturally in our L1, not just in English, in all languages. So those are some of the top-down activities or the skimming activities that you might do with them. The opposite of that is to look at from the bottom up. And this means looking more at the word or the sentence level of a text. Okay, this is where they're sort of looking for specific information. And this often involves vocabulary work. So you're looking for new words that they might not know, or revision of words that they do know, or they're looking for words within a theme, something like this. It doesn't always have to be specific vocabulary work, but quite often when you're looking more bottom up is where you're looking at for vocabulary work, that kind of thing. And some of this could be looking at the letters. So it could be like looking at the endings of a word. It could be looking for plurals, that kind of thing at the lower levels. You know, it's like, and how do you know this, student? Oh, because it has a plural S, that kind of thing. Fantastic. You know, you might ask questions like that. Looking at the prefix or the suffix of words. So, you know, looking, how do you know that that's a noun? How do you know that that's, how do you know it's a noun? Oh, teacher, because it has shun at the end, T-I-O-N. Fantastic. Okay, how do you know this is negative? Oh, because it has un at the start. Fantastic, that kind of thing. Looking more specifically at the words. Looking at the different word tenses, that's also a big part of it. You know, okay, you've got these words, now can you make them into an adjective? How would you make it into a verb? That kind of thing. And then the other thing that really shouldn't be dismissed, because it is tested in a lot of exams, is punctuation. So you might give them a paragraph, for example, and you're saying, right, okay, look at how the writer uses full stops, capital letters, how they use commas, that kind of thing. So here are some sort of activities that can be done through scanning. And when I'm talking about scanning, it's when they're looking through the text for a specific piece of information or a specific word. Skimming is where they're sort of looking at the whole text and building up a picture. Scanning is where you're getting them to, and they sometimes do it with their finger. They're looking for a very specific word within a paragraph or a small section or within a text. And what you can do is use the skimming knowledge. So always give them a skimming activity before a scanning activity, because if they've got a good general idea of the text, then they sort of know more quickly where to find a specific piece of information if they've read it quickly the first time. And some of the sort of typical activities you might do here would be to look for specific dates, to look for specific names, to look for specific places. So you could do text, you could ask them questions such as, what word means this? And you give them a definition. They then have to look through a paragraph and they have to say, oh, I think that this word means the definition. They're looking for specific vocabulary. They're working on some vocabulary within a text. You could do some pronoun work. So you could, for example, say, what does the pronoun he on line 10 refer to? So they find line 10, they find the he, they then look back and go, oh, okay, Joe Biden is the he. There we go. What does the pronoun do in some work like that? Who did a certain activity? Who did the president come with? Who did the president meet? That kind of thing. Specific words, specific vocabulary. Definition matches, that kind of thing. So the sort of questions that you would ask for scanning bottom up would be where, how long, when, what. These type of questions. Now, you can ask why. Why is a bit more tricky because that is a bit more difficult. You've got to make sure that it definitely has the why within the text, but you're looking for definitely questions such as this. So hopefully you can see that these work more looking at a specific word, or a specific piece of information, more than skimming, which looks at the whole text or just sections of a text. Please, I can see some questions coming in. If you've got any questions about this, please do put them in the chat. I'm going to get you, Catherine. I can see a question there. Thank you, Sophia. I'm going to get you a question there. Please, if you've got any question at all, please do put it in there. The earlier you get your question in, the more likely it is that I'm going to answer it. So I don't run out of time. Right. So low levels. So obviously with EFL, with teaching English, you have different levels from beginner all the way up to advanced proficiency level. And the way you would teach reading is different, really, between those levels. Now, the sort of general ideas are the same, a skimming and a scanning question. But for low levels in particular, it can be quite difficult to explain the technique of skimming and scanning. They don't really get it at sort of elementary the pre-intermediate should get it, but beginner and elementary level don't tend to really understand it. So if I was teaching these levels, or if I was teaching young kids, for example, I wouldn't really go into the technique of this is a skimming technique. This is a scanning technique. You're looking for this, you're looking for that. I would really, at those levels, sort of start with the basic questions, but without them knowing, give them a skimming question. Without them knowing that it's a scanning question, give them a scanning question. And one of the ways you can do it is by sort of giving them a time limit. But you're going to find with low levels that they do want to know every single word, and that can take a long time and it isn't quite natural, but you've just got to sort of get through it with the low levels. So give them lots of different types of questions to practice, because then once they get to intermediate, upper intermediate level, they really do know the different types of questions, the different type of activities. You're not going to be their first English teacher at intermediate or upper intermediate level. They would have come across other teachers who probably, hopefully, would have explained it a bit, or at the very least given them different types of skimming and scanning without them even sort of noticing. So some of the low level questions you can ask is, what is the topic of this text? And they might say something like animals, hobbies, countries. That should sort of be enough. Yeah. Don't expect to get too much in terms of a skimming question from the low levels. Yeah. Is it a happy story? Is it a sad story? That kind of thing. Where is the story? These are the sort of skimming questions that you can ask them. Now, where you're sort of looking, you're asking for the where as a whole text. Yeah. Don't sort of ask, where does the character go on holiday? You're sort of looking for a general question which talks about the where location of a text. So those are some of the sort of skimming things you can do with low levels. Scanning questions really are quite easier for low levels, and they do tend to be able to answer these better. You will find they read word by word, and sometimes that's good as a teacher because it gives you a little bit of a break. But you've really got to be able to be on top of it and be ready for them to answer everything word by word. Try to stop translators. So if they're 3 words in, they're like, oh, I don't know that word. Must translate that one word because I don't know that word. Okay, I know that word. That's taken them a minute and they've only 3 or 4 words in. You know, what you need to sort of say to them, okay, is, look, trust me. All you need to do is answer the question. Just read a little bit further on until you can answer the question. And then after we've answered the questions, then we can do a bit more vocabulary work going in for it. The other thing that you might want to do, and this is something that teachers definitely do, not all, but most do, is pre-teach some vocabulary before they read the text. So if you've got a text and you're not sure that they will know this word, you could sort of try and teach it to them before. Right, so exam classes. If you get told to go teach an exam class, exam technique is a big part of reading. And what do I mean by that is you've got to sort of, there's like, for example, an IELTS test has lots of different types of questions. Same with a Cambridge test, same with a Trinity test, TOEIC test, whatever it might be. It's not always going to be the same type of question. And what you need to do as much as an exam teacher is teach exam technique. So you would say, right, okay, if you get a question like this, it is a skimming question. It's a scanning question, this one. So you're looking for a specific word. You're sort of saying, right, okay, this question is quite an important question. You should spend 3 minutes of your hour on this one. Or this one is not so important. You should spend 50 seconds on this one. Exam technique is just as important as anything else. And in exam classes, they need to know, and really for all sort of classes, but especially exam classes, they need to know why they are wrong. So if they give you a wrong answer, don't just put an X and say it's wrong. Give it back to them. Say, right, have another go. Or, okay, here's the answer. Why is this the answer? Get them to go back and look at the text and actually see why they are wrong. The other thing you've got to be careful of with exam classes, you've got to be able to defend the answer. So if you say, right, the answer is Dublin, And they're like, well, no, teacher, no, teacher. The answer is Belfast. And you'd have to say, no, the answer is Dublin. No, teacher, the answer is Belfast. You have got to be able to go into the text, and it takes a bit of planning beforehand, and work out why the answer is not Belfast. You need to actually go into text and say, look, okay, line 3, third word, look there, read that for a little bit. That's where you will find the answer. So you've got to be able to defend the correct answer to the text as well. Right, couple more minutes and I'm going to get to these questions. Right, so here is a typical reading lesson. So how I tend to start is some sort of warmer. So you put some sort of photo or you put a discussion question up on the boards before they've even got the text, and you sort of, which is linked to the theme of what you're going to be doing today. And you say, right, and a typical one is look at the picture, tell your partner what is happening. And they look up at the picture and they can see some scientists doing some sort of experiment or something that matches the topic of the text you're going to give them. Get them sort of thinking, get them to sort of activate their knowledge, activate the English vocabulary they know about the text you're going to be reading. Then you might, and you don't always do this, but you might do some vocabulary pre-teach. So you could put some words on one side, you can put some pictures on the other side. They have to match the pictures, or you do it with definitions, that kind of thing. Don't do translations. So don't match the L1, their native language, to the L2 English. You know, keep them all in English, try and keep some definitions, that kind of thing. Then you give them some sort of skimming question. And a typical one is look at this headline, look at this title. What do you think it will be about? Tell your partner, I think it will be about this. Oh, no, I think it will be about this. Let's look at this again. Okay, yes, I believe you now. I think it will be about this. Right, good. Now you've got 3 minutes to check if your prediction was correct. And they skim through it, look through it all very, very quickly, and they decide whether they were correct or not. And then you start giving them some scanning questions: who, when, why, how many, which, questions like this, which might be sort of 10 questions around the text. You do the questions in order. Don't, the answers to question 1 should be in paragraph 1. Then a couple of lines later, question 2. Don't go first paragraph, question 1, last paragraph, question 2, second paragraph, question 3, fifth paragraph, question 4. Keep them in order as they go down, because that's how it works in the exams. And you just ask them sort of specific questions like that. And I've just pushed the wrong button there. And then you do some sort of productive activity. And this is some sort of activity where they have to produce something, they have to create something themselves, where they write something, or they speak to their partner, or they speak to the group about something to do with the topic you've done. So it could be something like extend the story, write a summary of this, something like that, where they have to produce something themselves that's based on the text. And the last thing that I want to talk about is finding text. And it can be very, very tricky, even for someone that's been doing English as a foreign language for a while, teaching English as a foreign language for a while. It can be very difficult to find good texts. And it takes a lot of time. So don't underestimate how long it would take you to find a text. So if you've got like an hour to prepare and you want to do a reading lesson, honestly, it can sometimes take you 20 or 30 minutes to actually find a text. It can be tricky. So what should you do about that? The first thing that I would do is put into Google, other search engines are available, but put into Google EFL or ESL texts. And EFL and ESL are very, very similar in meaning. It tends to be that Americans and North Americans call the field that I'm in, that you're watching this about, ESL. People from the UK, Ireland tend to call it EFL, and it's a very, very similar thing. There is a slight difference, but I don't think, for the purposes of this video, we're going to call it the same thing. And you might put EFL text pre-intermediate, you might put ESL text advanced, or you might start looking at topics, EFL business text, something like that. and you will find that websites come up. Some are paid, some are not paid. Okay, so that's what I would look at. You can take from news websites. News websites tend to be quite good for finding texts. You know, obviously something like the BBC website. I'm here in the UK, so I'm very British based. You know, there's lots of different categories in there. You know, you will find things on there for kids. You will find things on there for sports, things that match the interests of your students. You'll be able to find on something like the BBC website. The problem is they can be quite long. The other problem is they can be quite difficult in some of the words. So definitely for, you know, intermediate levels and up, it's pretty good, but it can be quite difficult for beginner and then elementary levels. Of my favorite website and is One Stop English. I think that has some really good reading texts on it. If you're going to pay for a website, I think that's a pretty good one to get, but there's also lots of free stuff on there as well. It tends to be, you know, they put it in different grades. Use this one for beginners, elementaries, or use this one for advanced, that kind of thing. I think it's a good one. Also often quite has questions that goes alongside it. Obviously textbooks. Now, you might work for a company that uses textbooks, and if that's the case, fantastic, because they will have already written text that match the levels or match the age ranges, that kind of thing. But if you don't, you might want to go online and look at some textbooks, see if you can look at the copyright laws in your country, see if you can take one of the texts and see if you can make some questions up from that. And then, so you've got your text from somewhere, then what you need to do is adapt the vocabulary or adapt the length to make sure it matches your students that you're going to get in the level. And that takes time. That could be tricky, but you will get used to it the more you do it. Okay. The final thing to be aware of is where you're teaching in the world and the topics that you give them. So I would be very, very careful in some countries in giving texts where there's sort of a romantic side of things to it, because yes, the students might actually be okay with it, but it only sort of takes one member of the class to be a bit annoyed to sort of kill your lesson a bit. You know, things such as, you know, text that contains sort of alcohol might be seen as bad in some parts. So just be careful of the type of groups you're teaching, obviously the different ages as well, and don't give them a text that they might not like the topic of. Thank you very much. Right, I'm going to get to these questions. Thank you if you are still there listening to me. Please do, if you agree with me or disagree with me, or if you've got any sort of experience of doing this, please do put it in the chat. Sophia, hi. I'm going to go. I hope you're still with us, Sophia. You asked this question about 25 minutes ago. Can you perhaps at the end of the webinar recommend some resources? So I hope I did that for teaching to these exams. I didn't do that. Right. So exams that you go and teach, what you should really be doing with exam techniques is using the papers, and there were online on the websites for the exam board. So for example, IELTS has papers on its website with typical text that they would see and the typical types of questions that they would do. Be using those basically. And I would be very, very careful if you're going to be teaching exam techniques and trying to make up your own questions, because there's plenty out there that you'll be able to take. You know, looking at textbooks, every exam that you teach has someone has written a textbook for, and you know, using that kind of thing would be good. So it really does depend on what exam you're going to be teaching. But the first thing I would do, Sophia, would be to go on the exam board's website, see if they've got any texts on there that you're free to use. See if you can get those into your class. That's the first thing I would do. Next thing I would do would be to look for the official mock exam papers and see if you can get some of that. And remember, a lot of things is exam technique. So you need to, and the best thing you can do there is to take the exam yourself. Don't pay, but you know, do a practice exam and work out yourself. If there are 90 questions and you've got an hour, how long should they spend on each question? If they're looking to get 60% in the exam. They don't need to get every single one correct. So a good technique to show them would be to say, right, if this is too difficult and it's taking you longer than you should be taking on this one, then move on to the next one, because that's a higher level question. Remember, you don't need to get 100% students in order to get to the level you want. So exam techniques is the sort of thing that you should be teaching really in these types of questions, Sophia. Hope that answered your question. Catherine, do I do these activities with B2C1? Yeah, so the levels really don't, the levels don't really matter. What tends to happen with the higher levels is you have more complicated texts. And, you know, the questions that you ask them might take longer to find, or, you know, there might be sort of one or two possible answers, and they have to sort of work out the question that they have to work out the answer that fits your question the most. But yes, the type of activities, you do a skimming, you do a scanning, that is the same type of thing, whether you're doing low levels or whether you're doing higher levels. What you would definitely do with the higher levels, B2C1, would be explain to them that this is a quick activity that shouldn't take you very long to do. This is an activity where you don't need to look at every word, that kind of thing. All right. Good luck with that. Thank you for everyone saying that they love these ideas and it's super helpful. And Jenny, I can't believe you were late. It's terrible. Go stand at the back of the class. Thank you very much, everyone, for all the nice little comments there. Alan or Alain, I'm sorry, I've mispronounced that probably. You're new to TEFL. What does L1 refer to? So the language that you grew up with, basically. So my L1 is English. My L2 to various degrees of ability is Spanish. I've got another L3, but it's still classed as an L2, if that makes sense, where I can speak a tiny bit of Japanese. But L1 is the language that I grew up with, basically, that my mum and dad spoke to me in, basically. It does get a bit complicated if you have a Spanish parent and an English parent, and some parents are fantastic in that their mum always speaks in Spanish and dad always speaks in English, so the kid is like, what's my L1? That makes it a bit complicated, but that tends to be the definition that fits for everyone. And the reason why I brought it up was because the way you speak in your L1, the way you read in your L1 is sort of the sort of activities that you want to get into the classroom. Yeah. Don't make them think that the way they read in English should be different from the way they read in their own language. Yeah. Good luck, Alan. Philip, hi. Unrelated question. I can't believe it. An unrelated question. I love unrelated questions. What happens if your contract is up at the school and you want to stay in that country? Happened to me in Japan. Do people find it easy to get employed at another school, or can contracts get extended? Germany, for example. Right. Don't know much about Germany, Philip, so I don't want to go into Germany, for example. Right. The first thing, and you're going to hate this answer, is it varies country from country. So let me talk a bit about my experience. I was working for a company in Japan. That contract was only for 4 months. They then had a rule that said I should go home after that 4 months. They didn't want me to stay in Japan. I wanted to stay in Japan. So when I was in my final month of that 4-month contract, I looked around for other jobs. I said to the company, you know, I took the application, did the application process, had an interview, blah, blah, blah. They offered me the job. And I said at the interview, will you sponsor my work visa? They said yes. Happy days. Other countries, you might have to, once your visa's up, you might have to leave that country, go back to your home country and then find another visa. You know, it really does depend country by country, Phil. So I'm sorry that doesn't really happen. So it doesn't really help you. But what I would say is most people I know find ways around it. And if you are already in Germany, for example, let's go with Germany, and you've got a company that's paying you, but they said they've only got 6 months work. If you then look at the next company, and you sort of might halfway through your 6-month contract be looking around for other jobs. If you see a job that's advertised to people outside of Germany, apply for that, because this company loves to employ people that are already there. For a couple of reasons. It'll probably be cheaper. And the other thing is that they know that you like the country and you're less likely to get homesick, that kind of thing. All right. So just look for it and send emails. That's what I would do, Phil. Yeah. Good luck. Chris. Hi. Oh, that's a good one. Do I get them to read out loud? So I don't get them to read out a whole text out loud. What I might do, and I always do this if I have some sleepers in the classroom that are nodding off, I get them to read out the questions. So I would say, right, okay, question 1. Juan, can you read out question 1? Juan's, oh, he said my name. What did I have to do? What did I do? Okay, yeah, question 1. Where is this story located? Something like that. Get them to read out the questions. That's just to make sure that they're all on point, to make sure that they're all listening, to make sure they know what they need to do. I don't get them to read out a whole text because that is not a very natural thing to do. When do you ever, in your L1, stand in front of a group of people with a book and read it word for word? The long neglected thorn bush that keeps catching on. You don't do it naturally in your L1, so don't get them to do it in their English lessons. Okay, keep it natural. Thomas, hi. We will need to reference the credit, right? Yes, if you are a lovely, fantastic, good teacher, and you would reference so you would say, okay, BBC News, December the 28th. 2021 web link. If you're a lovely person, that's what you do. A lot of people don't do that. Really does depend on copyright law in your country. That's what I would say, Thomas. Good luck. Bjorn, hi. Do I recommend taking an IELTS test to improve my chance to get a teaching job in Asia, Vietnam? Good question. So if you are a non-native speaker, I think that's probably why you're asking, Bjorn. Right, what you've got to find out is from that company that you want to work for in Vietnam, what if they really annoyingly and wrongly, because I don't think companies should do this because it's not a good idea and it's no scientific basis to it. But if they have a job that says native speakers only, and you like that job, Bjorn, I would email them and say to them, what do you class as a native speaker? And they might say something simple like British passport holders, Australian, American passport holders. You know, just because you've got a British passport, does that make you an English native speaker? Not really. You know, that then is really more to do with the visa more than English ability, Bjorn. But they might turn around and say, oh, someone who's done a high school qualification in English, someone who's do their degree in English. Companies have different rules for what is a native speaker than others. So that's what I would do. I would recommend. Now, if you get turned down, it could be because the government of Vietnam or China or wherever it might be has rules over who can get a work visa. It's not about your English ability. It's just the government, and it's not the company's fault. It's the government's fault that decides who can get or cannot get work visas. So that's what I would do. Now, an IELTS test is a good test. An IELTS test is difficult. An IELTS test is expensive. There are cheaper tests out there which you might be able to prove your English ability with. I'm not saying everybody should go out and do an IELTS test. You know, most native speakers I know do not get the top grade from IELTS. Okay, that's what I would say, Bjorn. Good luck, all right? Michael Andrew McKean. Very specific question. Do I know anyone who's taught in Mexico City? I know there's a lady downstairs from me right now who was taught in Mexico. Would I anticipate it being realistic? Excuse my wife, not just some random lady. Would you anticipate it being realistic to expect to find a job there? Mexico is a big market for teaching English. Everyone I know that's been there loved it. I've traveled a bit around Mexico. I quite enjoyed it. Mexico is tricky in that sometimes you see jobs advertised. We will fly you to Mexico, come work for us. But a lot of jobs in Central America, especially, the companies aren't full of money. You know, you're not going to make a ton of money going to Central America, but you will have a lot of fun. And So a lot of companies, you might advertise, you either see an advert and they don't pay for your flights, that kind of thing. Or what I would do would be to get onto Google, look for language schools within Mexico City and email them and say, hi, this is me. I'm very keen to come to Mexico. Do you have any vacancies? That kind of thing. All right. That's what I would do myself, Michael. Mexico City is mad. Brilliant mad. JMD Mendieta, you cannot have a copy of my presentation. I apologize, but you can watch this again on YouTube, Facebook, LinkedIn. William, where are the different levels defined and explained? Very good question. So there is something called the CEFR, the Common European Framework of Reference. That might be something that you need to look at, CEFR. But schools tend to, that you go work for a school will say, a good school will say, this is what we think intermediate is. This is what we think pre-intermediate is. This is what we think upper intermediate is. So you know, that would do that. But also the different types of exams have different levels, but they tend to all match up to this CEFR, Common European Framework of Reference. And it might be worth spending a bit of time looking at that, William. Okay. Good luck. No problem. Thank you, people, to answering the questions. Takes your ages. Yes. Lovely. Thank you, everyone. Vladimir, is there a difference in teaching text for groups and individually? No. If you're doing one-on-one classes, you still give them a skimming and you still give them a scanning. You still give them a top down and a bottom up question. There's no difference. The only difference is if they're in groups, they should try and talk to each other with their partners, work out the answers, that kind of thing. Yeah. Good luck. JM, hi again. Does TEFL.org help course completers to land, find a job? Yeah, if you do one of our courses, JM. So if you go on our website, TEFL.org, and you do one of our 120-hour courses, we will give you some help afterwards to land, find a job. We won't fill in your application form. We won't write your CV for you, but we do offer you some help. I've also done webinars where you can look at this kind of thing. But yes, we will help you. And it's all this on our website, tefl.org. Okay. Coming to the end now. Thank you very much. I'm glad there's lots of lovely comments. Thank you, everybody. Please, if you did enjoy this, I've done loads of these other webinars. Go and have a watch them. And we do them every week. Jenny, you've been a volunteer teaching of English online. Will employers view me as a new teacher if you have not been employed? Interesting one. So tends to be what companies tend to do is as soon as you've got your certificate of teaching English as a foreign language, companies tend to say, right, any teaching you do after you have your certificate counts towards experience. I don't know anyone that has been turned down from doing because their experience as a volunteer didn't count. Not at all. I mean, I would love, if I was still managing people, I would love a bit of experience like that. So no, they won't see you as a new teacher. Now, one thing I would say is that newly qualified teachers tend to be seen as new for like the first year at least. So if you've done 6 weeks of volunteer work, you're not going to be classed as a properly experienced teacher. Yeah. So just bear that in mind a bit, Jenny. Yeah. You know, they sort of tend to sort of expect people to work for a year or 2 years even before they're not seen as new. Okay. I hope that answers your question. I'm sorry if I've not got past your question. CEFR is not an exam, Shola. CEFR is what the exams are based on. A typical English exam would be something like IELTS, Trinity, Cambridge. Look those up. Anna, that's the first question we've had about ChatGPT. Oh, no. Is it a good idea to use ChatGPT to write text? Does anyone have an answer to that? I personally don't think I'd trust it, but maybe that's because I'm 43 years old. Anna, you don't look 43 years old. You might trust it more than me. Not Baltic, you get the last question. On the point of application forms in general, does one teach people how to navigate administrative texts? Well, yeah, so that would be the sort of thing that you might do in business English classes or legal English classes. Or if you have been employed by a student or a school to teach that in specific. I've taught application forms with very, very low levels of ESOL, whole nother webinar, ESOL students. But it's, forms aren't that difficult really from sort of elementary, pre-intermediate level upwards. Okay. And I think there's some, I hope that answers your question, Walter. And look, people are starting to talk about Chat GPT, which is probably going to do me out of a job sometime. Thank you, everybody, for coming to this webinar. I hope you enjoyed it. Why not like us, or why not write in the comments what a load of rubbish that was, if that's what you think. Because here at the TEFL.org, we're quite vain and we like likes. Thank you very much. See you all again soon. We do these webinars every Friday, or if not on a Friday, sometimes on a Thursday, blah, blah, blah. But we tend to do them weekly. We've done loads of these now over the last few years. They're all available on the Facebook in the video section, or in the YouTube page, or LinkedIn, that kind of thing. Thank you very much.